it's also that, there's just ample opportunity to go down the gravitational pull forces of injustice. Like, oh, that's so frustrating. Why are they doing that? I mean, I catch myself doing that, talking to coworkers when I walk in about, did you see this thing? This is crazy. What's going on with it? They're crazy. When, as opposed to thinking about anything else in that moment. And I try and yank myself out of that. But I think that you're not going to do it alone, but I think you will play a major role in saving us from this, because I think because people just need to see themselves through a different lens and realize this is distracting me from who I'm supposed to be.
Well, a lot of what modern life should involve is the ability to ignore certain things. So, for instance, I don't know if you know that app Nextdoor.
Oh, right. I used to have it, but then I'd see all the packages being stolen off my neighbors' porches in Oakland. And then I started enjoying living in Oakland less. And I love the city of Oakland. It's got its problems. It definitely has its problems. But as an East Bay kid, and went to school out there, and, I have deep love for the East Bay. And it's always had those problems. But when you see stuff being stolen on your phone in the middle of the night when you wake up, it creates a sense that, they're out to get my stuff. Right. It's terrible.
Right. And so I have it in my spam filter, but I look at it, and every headline is people stealing, somebody broke into somebody's house, this dog bit me, this is rabid dog going around, there's this homeless person that's yelling and attacking people, on and on and on. I feel like I'm living in this neighborhood. It's like Beirut or something in the 1980s. I can't even walk out my door. I don't look at Nextdoor anymore. I just ignore it. I don't open it ever, because I know that they're designed algorithmically to put that in front of you every single time so that you click on it, because we respond to that kind of stuff naturally. We can't help it. So you have to be able to shut that stuff up and look at what you can actually control in your life. So I have this visceral dislike of what's going on in Ukraine, because I was in Ukraine recently, and I feel I've identified very strongly with their struggle, right? And that outrage feeling, every time I read an article about it, it just drives me crazy. So the only thing is I stop reading as much as I can. I read things that are kind of rational and intelligent, and I send them money, and I donate as much as I can, and I help them practically. But I don't allow myself to get that kind of outraged feeling all of the time. So somebody has to write a book. Somebody has to instruct us in what to ignore and what to actually pay attention to. So there are things that you can control, injustices that are out there that you could control by voting, by amassing a movement, by, dealing with climate change, not by trying to recycle every little thing in your house, but actually doing something really much more macro in the world, joining a cause. There are things you can do, and that's positive, and that's a way of channeling that kind of dark energy in you for a positive purpose. But it's totally disruptive, and it totally distracts you and weakens you and drains you of energy to fall into those rabbit holes and let yourself fall into them. So you have to learn the art of what to ignore and what not to pay attention to, and understand that you're wired to see those kind of red alert buttons on Facebook or on Nextdoor or wherever they are. And it's negative. It's like a candy rush, and you have to avoid it.
And it's taking us away from our purpose, which we each have. I mean, I think to me that's the most deleterious aspect of it.
Unless your purpose is to organize and be an activist. People ask me, I wrote a lot about, in my human nature book, about the shadow side of human nature, right? And we all have it. We all have a dark side. We all have hidden aggression. We all have feelings of envy. We all have feelings of grandiosity. We all have aggressive impulses. How do you deal with it? And I say the way to deal is to channel it into something positive and pro-social. And that can be putting it in your artwork, venting that anger and that outrage in something that people kind of can identify with. Or it can be in organizing something. That could be your purpose in life, in actually doing something positive. So that's the only way that you could actually use that energy for some kind of actual life's task or purpose.
You've been discussing lately a bit on some of your channels about masculine and feminine, let's say, roles, and crises of the masculine feminine dance, as well as crisis of masculinity per se, the crisis of femininity per se. Do you care to expand on that a bit? I think we could probably take 3-4 hours to explore all this in full. But I was struck by some of the things that you said, because I agree completely that just as we are not given a roadmap when we arrive in the world as to how to find our purpose, I think there's also a very conflicted roadmap that's thrown in front of us, and indeed conflicting multiple roadmaps about what it means to be masculine or feminine or some combination of both, which of course everybody is some combination of both, just to varying degrees.
Well, yeah. So men have a feminine side to them, which if you try to repress it, will come out in other ways. And women have a masculine side to them. I think Jung described this very well with the anima and the animus, which I think is extremely real. It's very, very confusing times for both men and for women right now. We don't know the roles that they're everything is just so fluid, and it's very, very difficult, particularly if you're young. So young women are getting this idea that everything should be equal and that women should have, and of course it's right, should have be paid the same and should have the same career opportunities. There should be no prejudice or harassment or anything. But at the same time, on social media, it's all about looking perfect, and looks are incredibly important. And if you're not hot, you're in terrible trouble. And a lot of young girls are extremely confused by this. They're getting mixed signals, right? And boys are even in perhaps even worse circumstance where being masculine is seen as something negative. So we don't have any ideals out there anymore of what constitutes a good positive form of femininity and a good positive form of masculinity. In fact, we even think that there shouldn't be anything like that there's no such thing as being masculine or feminine or whatever. It's very, very confusing. And so, I think of masculine traits that I think are very positive and that should be out there to kind of counteract the sort of Andrew Tate seduction that a lot of young men are falling for. And it's a kind of an inner strength where you're sort of in control of your emotions. You're not invulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. But you can take criticism. You can take you can have moments of failure and you'll bounce back, but you have a kind of inner resilience and a kind of inner strength, a kind of a quiet calm that I think used to be exemplified in movie icons like a Gary Cooper type thing, right? And that kind of sense of inner calmness where you're not hysterical, you're not getting upset about everything that happens, where you have a kind of an inner strength and a confidence, and you can withstand kind of what Ryan Holiday talks about, a lot about with stoicism. You can withstand all of the hardships in life, but you have that citadel within you, is a very, very powerful form of masculinity, as opposed to it's all about sleeping with a lot of women, having really fast cars, being abusive and being a bully, et cetera, et cetera. These are signs of weakness, of insecurity. And to be masculine should be a sense of security and inner confidence and inner strength, right? And that's what we should venerate in our culture, and we should have icons like that, okay? It doesn't mean that there's no role for men who are not masculine or who have more of the feminine virtues. There's definitely a role for that. And, we see a lot of that in all sorts of arenas of life. And then there should be a positive model for women, where instead of their appearances being judged by their appearances and having to conform to the ideals of what's hot or not, it's about being incredibly powerful and competent and have expertise and being really successful in your career and as opposed to being continually judged by your appearances, which is very damaging. So these are terrible times. I mean, I feel fortunate that I grew up in a time where there were these kind of models for me to go by. And I think of my father, who was a very quiet man, and he was just a middle-class salesman is basically what he was. He just sold for all his whole life. He sold chemical supplies for one company. But he was very dignified. He treated people well. He was very calm and very quiet, but he also was very empathetic. that was my role model for what I think is a good masculine energy. And I think a lot of people just don't have that, and they're very lost. And so I don't know what the answer is to that. I can't really produce that out of thin air, but I wish I could.
Well, certainly nowadays there are many more, let's say, examples and options of masculine and feminine qualities out there for observation because of social media and because of the internet. And as you pointed out before, a key feature to becoming a functional human being, especially nowadays, is learning what to ignore.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an interesting idea in the circles around nutrition and health that, never before in human history have human beings been able to access such a wide variety of foods that differ from what their ancestors ate. And I don't even mean ancient ancestors. I mean, if you grew up in the Bay Area, as I did in the 1970s and 80s, there were a few ethnic restaurants, but we ate the same, 15 or 20 foods over and over again.
Right.
And then eventually that exploded into dozens of options and more, and fusion foods and all sorts of things. And so there is this idea in the nutrition communities that we are not hardwired to think about and discern so many different food options and to taste so many distinct flavors, whereas before people in one portion of the planet or country ate generally one way in a given season, if there's seasonality, et cetera, et cetera. In a similar vein, we are now, and children too are now overwhelmed with the number of different options of how to express oneself, both masculinity and femininity, but generally speaking. And so the question is then, how does one choose? Right? How does one decide what's functional, what works, what's best, what's me, right? Everyone asking themselves, who am I, right? I think all teenagers, I find this fascinating, ask themselves, who am I? Adults don't tend to ask themselves that question,
Right.
But who am I?
I still ask myself that
Okay,
question.
well, that's good. Maybe I should ask myself that more often. But I think that we clearly have gone over a cliff with this stuff. I don't think we're still at the point where we're kind of veering towards the edge of confusion. I think young people are really confused because the moment one assumes one clear and, let's say, balanced set of masculine, feminine attributes, or maybe veers a bit more masculine or a bit more feminine, it's like there are a million examples telling you that that's wrong.
I know.
And then sometimes has the tendency to anchor to, well, no, I'm right because this is who I am. And then all of a sudden you're in a larger battle. So, Gary Cooper's great, love his movies. But we now have a million variations on Gary Cooper that don't look anything like the Gary Cooper you and I are talking about. And a lot of people won't even know who we're talking about.
I know they won't.
Perhaps
I know I'm a dinosaur.
But perhaps it illustrates the point. No, not that you're a dinosaur, but that there is no single or even set of masculine or feminine ideals. So picking role models is something that I really truly internalized from your book, Mastery.
Yeah.
There were a lot of lonely years for me, and I won't get into the stories of just wondering, what am I going to do? I'm 13, my home was completely broken, no semblance of the reality it was before. Who are the males in my life I'm going to orient to? And fortunately for me, I assigned mentors to me, whether or not they knew it or not, that really helped me along. And I changed them up as you recommend. There wasn't one.
Yeah.
I understood there was a breaking up process, an integration process, combining and threading together different things. I truly believe that that's what's required. It doesn't have to be 100% Gary Cooper. It can be 10% Robert Greene, 10% someone else, 5% this, and creating a pie chart of sorts of, who one wishes to be in a given context.
Yeah.
But that takes work. It takes a bit of work and discernment, but gosh, that's powerful. And really credit goes to you because you were a mentor of mine. You didn't even realize it.
No, I didn't.
In the way that you forge and organize information. And there were others. But Mastery is where I learned to do that. And this is not a podcast, it's a sales pitch for Mastery, but gosh, it really taught me, okay, I have a graduate advisor. She was wonderful and brilliant, but she didn't know how to explain a lot of things to me. So I'd find someone else for that.
Right.
And someone else for the other thing, and someone else for the other thing. And together create a patchwork of really excellent mentors that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think there's a role for that process that you spell out in Mastery in the larger context of who to become as a person, and that includes masculine and feminine ideals.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing process throughout your life. So who you glommed onto when you were 14 or 15 will change when you're 19. I had a series of people like you're talking about. My high school English teacher who had an enormous impact on me, who taught me basically how to write. I internalized his voice. When I went to Berkeley, I had a professor there who became my kind of surrogate father at Berkeley, who I deeply admired for his level of scholarship. So he became kind of an intellectual role model. Later in life, when I finally wrote my first book, I met a man, Joost Elfers, who was a book packager, who understood the business, etc. He kind of saved me. He was sort of my mentor for the next phase in my life. So on and on and on, I found people, but they have positive qualities, qualities that I admire. They're not perfect. Everyone is flawed. And so at some point, maybe you see too many of the flaws. You go on, I need somebody new in my life. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like you're violating any codes or hurting them. You move on to somebody else. But the sense of finding people whose qualities you admire, we don't learn from people just by following their ideas. We pick up their energy, their spirit. Now, you didn't necessarily pick up my energy or spirit from reading Mastery, although maybe you did, I don't know. But when you're interacting with that professor at Stanford or whatever, it's not just verbally, there's kind of a nonverbal communication going on. You're internalizing some of the positive qualities that you saw in them and finding these series of mentors, because I call it surrogate parents. You can't choose your father and mother, but you can choose these ideals for you. You can choose these mentors in your life. You can kind of rewrite your family history and find that father figure you never had by glomming onto this person, but it has to be the right fit. It has to be someone that you connect to emotionally and intellectually, and that has the positive qualities you wish for yourself.
Well, I'll embarrass you perhaps by saying that since I was a freshman in college, which is really when I turned my academic life around and really my life around, I've maintained the same notebook with a list of names of people that I admire and who I'm trying to emulate in some way, not in every way, certainly. And certain names have been crossed off, but most of them have survived. And certainly after reading Mastery, your name made that list. And
I hope I'm not being crossed off at some point.
No, not at all, not at all. And through reading Mastery, there were additional names. I had the great misfortune of having all three of my academic advisors die: suicide, cancer, which sounds tragic. The joke in my field is you don't want me to work for you. That's what everyone says. But by being essentially scientifically orphaned, because there's a strong mentor-mentee relationship in science and progression through the career track, it forced